and thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me here today. My name is Henriette Roued-Cunliffe, and I work with Lorna at the Royal School of Library and Information Science, University of Copenhagen. I haven't been to this workshop before, so it's kind of new for me. And I thought after the nice start, I thought I wanted to explain actually where I come from, where my background is, because I do work with research data and I use my own data for research, but the data that I use is humanities data. It's heritage data particularly, and that's because I come from archaeology. I come from archaeology, and I took a journey starting with prehistoric archaeology in Aarhus, and I went up to digital archaeology all the way up. And today I work a lot with heritage on the internet and data sharing. So data sharing of humanities data. And I think this is a very important topic also for a lot of librarians. On the one hand, because a lot of you come from library science as a humanities subject in some places in the world, and also on the other hand, because a big part of a lot of libraries' sort of aim is to preserve heritage data sets. So this is the kind of area that I want to talk about today. Unfortunately, my talk isn't very technical, or maybe it's fortunate. So it's kind of it's an easing you into the more technical parts of the coming days. I hope you'll find that it's very passionate, because this is something that I'm very passionate about, open heritage data. I think it's very, very important, and I really hope that you can see this in my talk. I will come in on this at the end, I hope, but I also wanted to say that I am, at the moment, working on making some more technical tutorials for people from the humanities, or librarians and museum people and archive people who want to work with open data and heritage data. So this is something I'm working on, but it's still, time and everything. Yes. And also I wanted to say that another thing that occurred to me while listening to the first talk was that there are a lot of ways of working with data. So you mentioned Python and other ways of coding and working with data. The way that I usually work with data is working with it on the internet, so working with data sharing, but also making new presentations of data for various reasons. So I usually work with XML and JSON as data sets, and work with PHP and JavaScript to try and manipulate this data in new ways so that you can present it via the internet. Yeah. Yes, maybe not. Oh. I thought I turned it on. Well, now it says off. It worked a second ago. Technique, yeah. Yes. Is it not working on here either? Oh. Fantastic. Oh, great. Wi-Fi! Yes. Access. That's actually the second thing I want to talk about. Access. Yes, this is a great intro into that. I should be on the Wi-Fi. Oh well. It'll come. I'll continue. The thing I wanted to say first about access is how important it is for people to have access to their own heritage, no matter where they are around the world. we've seen a lot of mobility among people, especially young people moving to bigger cities or moving to the another side of the earth. And yes, well, that's not. Yeah. Okay. And the thing I want to say about access is actually it comes from my own experience. When I started studying archaeology, it was because I had a great interest in heritage. And at the same time, my own grandparents also died and left a lot of photos and knowledge about the family that I had never seen before. So this is common among archaeologists, the archaeologists I know, that a lot of them are also interested in family history. They kind of go hand in hand. So I was also very interested in family history, and I delved into my own family's history. After a couple of years in Aarhus, I moved to the UK. And sitting in the UK was very difficult to have access to material about my own family's history. When I was in Denmark, I could take my car, I could drive to the local or the regional archives, I could get access to material. But luckily in these years, there was a big amount of digitization of material that family historians could use. So I could sit in the UK on the internet and look up things and search parish records and search census data for knowledge of my own family history while I was studying over there. And that was a great experience for me. And that has really formed a lot of my opinions on access to my own heritage, because this was my own heritage, my own family that I wanted to know something about, and it was actually possible for me to find this via the internet. And this is something that open data can actually do. It can give access to your own heritage. I have a colleague who's in Indianapolis, and she's been working on digitizing the records, the archive of this African-American church in Indianapolis. And one of their things is with this digitized material, one of the things I said to her is, it's very important that this digital material is available online so that people who might not be local, but who still have some sort of heritage related to this material can access it, no matter where they are in the world, or if they're sitting in New York or if they're sitting in Singapore, they have access to this material. In that sense, we can actually preserve this material in the long run. Another example is I don't know how many of you know about the little town of Elkhorn in the US. It's some people nodding. There's been some very interesting, funny TV shows about Elkhorn. I had a student a library student who's been over there and doing a placement last year. They have this nice library and heritage center for Danish American history in Elkhorn. So there's a lot of Danes who've come to Elkhorn, and they have this their own particular brand of Danish heritage in Elkhorn, which involves æbleskiver and medisterpøls all in one go. It's quite interesting. But one of the things that I found was a bit worrying was that they wanted to do something for young people. They wanted young people to join in this discourse about the heritage of Danes in America. But they didn't, at least at that time, really understand that in order to do that, they needed to make this material, all the things, the knowledge that they had here, available to the young people. Not just the very few young people staying in Elkhorn, but also the much larger amounts of young people who were maybe living in New York or in California or wherever they're living. It needs to be accessible for them. So this image is also about the other side of making heritage available for those for whom it's their heritage. And this is another part of digitization which concerns repatriation. So there's a lot going on at the moment about can we repatriate heritage through digital means, like through 3D imaging or just by actually digitizing a data set and putting it online so people actually have access to it. And with that comes a lot of interesting conundrums that we need to consider. This particular project is, for the other Nefertiti, is two artists in Berlin who have taken or have made a 3D model of this statue or this head, and have put it online as open data set. So anyone can take this, download it, and print their own Nefertiti head. And it's done as an art project. It's done to provoke. And the museum in Berlin where this is stored were angry. And you know, and it's kind of, I had a nice chat with them earlier in the year, and it's done as a sort of provocative piece of art to show, to say to the institution, are you sure that you have the right to keep this head locked down when it's not even your heritage? And they went so far as to say, you stole this head from Egypt and are now keeping it in Berlin under lock and key in a way, and you're saying no one can take pictures of it, no one can do anything with it. Are you sure that you as an institution have... They were challenging this concept. So there is a lot of critique back and forth in the idea of open data. For some, it's about opening up the discourse on heritage. It's about who is allowed to tell history. But it's not just idealism, because as a sort of... On the other hand, people are saying, but we can't stop people from misusing this. So now people can use this in a shoot-them-up game, and we can't stop them. So what are we going to do? And we can't decide, we can't control what people use this open data for. But I would like to turn that argument on its head and say, right now, as you probably all know, digitization is going so fast. And right now, open heritage and open data generally is also moving very fast. I know for myself, if I want to find images that I can use for something, whatever it is, I made a dress out of some pictures and stuff. If I can't go and find the images that I wanted to use at first because they're not putting it out as open data, I will just go and find some other images. And then those other images are going to be what we in future are going to think of as a part of this heritage. So, yeah, things are happening really fast right now. And if you're not if you're not thinking about this and putting information out there and putting data out there in an open manner, my fear is that information, not just you as an institution, because I don't really care so much about that, but the heritage is going to lose out. And that could be the, marginalized heritage, heritage that's already marginalized, that's already very down, deep down in our archives. If that's not both digitized and put out in an open manner, that's going to be even more marginalized in the future. So, yes, are we ready for the next? Is it still not working?
You don't have any neighborhood reports.
Yes,
But you don't have any reports. So we'll need you to log in on this one if you want to.
Okay, well, I'll take it like this, it's fine. One of the initiatives that's going on at the moment that I wanted to mention is the Open Glam movement. And they have a website where you can sort of look into their principles and things like that. But they have these principles that I think are quite interesting to think about in terms of open data. And I'm not going to get into them too much because I'm actually going through them in my own sort of 5 questions that I promised. But their principles, one of them that I think is really interesting is in terms of not adding new rights. And I'll get into that a bit later when we talk about copyright. But this is a thing that's sometimes a bit tricky. The whole rights situation and copyright and licensing and stuff is very tricky. I don't know how many of you can nod to that, but it's really, my experience is that when I talk to librarians and museum people and archive people, it's such a tricky field. Everyone's really worried about this. It's horrible. But one of their key principles is that if we have, to keep digital representations of works for which copyright has expired, so things that should be in the public domain, not add new rights onto them. So institutions shouldn't add new rights to things that are actually in the public domain. And I like that idea. And this is also something that's very specific for the field of heritage data. And that's where, even though this is called Glam, for the galleries, sometimes it's a bit, they also work with more modern data sets. Of course, archives also do, and libraries also work with more modern data sets where the copyright is still on, but that kind of gets muddled sometimes in the whole discourse about where copyright stops. So we have a point where copyright stops, and after that, they're saying institutions shouldn't add extra restrictions onto material. Of course, with copyright, probably you all know, but it continues till 70 years after the death of the artist or author or whoever made it, the creator. And after this, it's technically public domain. An issue in this, an issue I'm sure many of you have occurred, is the things that are what we call orphan works. So we don't actually know who had the original copyright, and we're not quite sure maybe when it's from. So we have a hard time figuring out what to do with it. And that can be quite an issue. And I wish I could say it doesn't matter, it's not that important, but actually it is very important. Not because the copyright itself is important, because that's, of course, I feel very important for living artists. They should, of course, be able to get, get money for the work that they do and be able to keep the rights for their own stuff. I think that is very important. But for things that are older and that should technically be in the public domain, when the issue as I see it is that people get scared. And we've had so many, or we have a few cases at least, where institutions have been pulled into court because they have put something online that they shouldn't have put online, and that scares the whole community. And I feel, as a researcher standing sort of at the edge of it and looking over the Glam community, the libraries and archives and museums, I see a lot of people who are scared of is it better just not to put things online then? Is it better not to risk it? Because if we put them on, we risk that someone's going to come after us and say that this is not okay, and they might even sue us. And I think the risk should also be turned on its head, because if we don't put it online, we are stopping creative reuse of this. We're stopping creativity. Creativity has always been dependent on using previous material and building upon other people's creativity. And in essence, we are also protecting someone and someone's material who is dead instead of looking to new living things that can happen. So, yeah, something to think about. The other side of this is also what can we do with open heritage data. And in Denmark, we have the Hack for DK that's also spreading out across Scandinavia and other parts of the world also have similar hackathons for heritage data, and that's a really good, I think, a really good place to start. And I don't know how many of you know about hackathons. Yeah, there's some people. Yes. So for those who are not quite sure, it's a sort of an event where people come together with different skills. They can program, some of them, and some can do design. Some are data scientists, and some, different skills. And especially in this case, there's quite a few people, luckily, who also come with some knowledge about heritage. And it's an interesting mix. You're usually together for, it can be, like, in this case, we're together for like 48 hours. And you get food and everything you need, and you just sit with your laptops and you work on projects together with other people, or you work on projects alone. And the idea is that the outcome should be that people can, should be some sort of new way of looking at different data sets. So sometimes it's a game, sometimes it's an app for school children, sometimes it's, a visualization of library data. And it's really interesting to see the different things. But one thing that I've noted through the years that I've been a part of this is that for newcomer institutions who bring data sets to the table for the hackers to work with, their expectation, sometimes we need to be better at managing their expectations also, but one of the things that actually I found was very interesting that they usually mention is that they weren't quite aware how little they were able to control what the hackers did with their data sets. So this is the thing, again, when you put your data set out to this sort of hackathon, or you put it online as open data, you can't control what people are going to do with it, and that can be a terrifying feeling that you can't control that. So, just see what the time is saying. Yeah. I wanted to go through these 5 questions that I'm considering at the moment, and please do give me your comments on them. Either as we go along or afterwards, because it's still a working process. But I was thinking of looking at it as a way of how open is your data, because a lot of libraries and museums and archives are starting out wanting to put data up as open data, and I kind of wanted to make a level structure or something that could help you look at how open is your data actually, because there is a sort of a scale from it's there to it's really open and accessible. And the first step, no, I really do need. Actually, did you have a internet cable?
Yeah, we have a LAN.
Yeah. There we go. That's to USB. Okay. There we go. Okay. Everything that can go wrong is going wrong. Yes, technique. Okay, so the first step, or the first sort of level of open heritage data is, of course, that it's online, that it's published. The data set is published online in a way that it can be searched and found with some metadata. And the first example that, unfortunately, you can't see is down below, is from the portrait database from the Royal Library here in Denmark, with 9,972 portraits. And I did a search for Anker, which is a well-known Danish artist family, and got 177 results. So if I then... Yes? Maybe? Ah. Oh, yes. Oh, it's working. Great. So if I click on one of the images, I can, I've searched for the image, I click on one of the images, I get the image that is in the database, and I get a whole lot of metadata about the image, which is great. That's what I wanted. Another thing I can do, because of the way that this is set up, is that I can go in and do an advanced search. So I can search for specific types of metadata. In this case, searching for the title will give me, of Anna Anker, will give me 79 results. So that's something I can do in this kind of system, and that for me is sort of the first level. It's online, it's free to access, and it's available. I can search it and I can use it. The next step is where this database is a bit problematic, because the next step is the material published with an open license or in the public domain, and is it clearly communicated in conjunction with the material? So for this material, I'm assuming here, and I know from other databases, that Michael Anker, who painted the image, is dead in 1927. So technically this image should be in the public domain. But the copyright says that the image is possibly protected by copyright, which is definitely not clearly communicating what it is. It's very unclear. And that, for me, if I came across this as someone who wanted to use this image, I would go, okay, now I am unsure. I don't know what I can do with this image. I'm going to go somewhere else where I know that they know, or they're more clear about copyright, because actually I do care, and there's a lot of people in the world today who do care about copyright. I don't want to break copyright, so I'm looking for things that are going to help me not break copyright. I want to be respectful to artists. I go to the National Gallery of Denmark, which I know has a gallery, a collection, online collection, where they've put on this statement. So this says this image is in the public domain, and therefore you can use it for all purposes. And that's great. And this also comes with, so this is the third step is that does the institution, the creator, actively encourage reuse of the material and provide support for anyone who wishes to reuse this free of charge? So that's what they do here at the National Gallery. They have this text that explains what does the public domain mean, what can you do with these images, where can you find, So what are you allowed to do with them? You're allowed to share them, you're allowed to remix them, you can use it for all purposes. And this also gives people a chance to say, but it would be really nice if you also acknowledged who made the image. And I think a lot of people, I know I do, love to acknowledge who did something or whose work we're building upon. So this is a really nice, this is the third step. The fourth step is, yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes, I wanted to say also the Europeana collections also do a lot in terms of opening up and also explaining and having whole systems of supporting people who want to reuse their material. So the fourth way is something that we don't really see in heritage data sets so much. I haven't really come across this. If any of you've come across it, I would love to know. I'm looking for examples. But it's something that I know very well from library systems. Because librarians have been doing this for a while. It is making material available in an open machine-readable format that anyone can export or download. And this is usually done quite well with library systems. So in this case, I could download the whole. I made a search again for Anga, and I can download or access the whole list of things I found as an RSS or XML file, or I can, in this system, I can export it to various file types that I can open in my own data sets. The RIS file type is quite good for opening in different kind of reference applications. So that's the fourth step. And the fifth step is the step actually that I've been working the most with during my time with heritage data, and that is making it available through a well-described web service or API, so an application programming interface, which everyone has access to. And there, I would like to, one of the most important things there is actually that it's well-described. Because I do see a lot of APIs and web services that are available where no one can understand what's going on or how to use it. And this is one of the things that I want to work on in my own tutorials also, is making sort of tutorials where people can access and use these data sets even though they're not in themselves very well described, because it is quite difficult. I've struggled with it through the years. It does require that you, it's a steep learning curve to get to the point where you can use it. But again, Europeana has done an amazing piece of work in this area. Their web service, of which they have different types of web services, is very, very well described, and it has this thing that I don't remember what they call it, but where you can actually go in and say, I want to use this, I want to input my query. So it looks like a normal search box, an advanced search box, but where it helps you create a web service URL that you can use further on. So I know at this point we've gone into the more technical part of it, and I kind of want to say this is something I want to follow up on and do extended courses and tutorials on in the future. But for now, I just want to say that this is sort of, so far, the top level of my list of how open is your open data. If it has a web service that is well described, that anyone can go in and make use of, then it is pretty open, in my view. So, what am I using this for now? At the moment, I've been working with Aagaards billeder, Aagaards images. Any of you know that? No? Yeah. So it's a image set of photographs taken in the 1860s-ish in Kolding, in Jutland, and the archives in Kolding from the beginning took an open approach to this image set, so they start digitizing it, and as they were digitizing it, they put it online, and with my encouragement, they went, because this is another thing with these big systems like the Royal Library systems and the state, the National Gallery and the National Museum and these big institutions in Denmark. They have the money to make big systems and make web services and things like that. And probably a lot of you, if you don't come from these institutions, are thinking, even if you do come from these institutions, perhaps you're thinking, we can't afford this. This is going to cost a lot of money to make web services. And I'm here to tell you that luckily there are ways around spending a fortune on a custom system. And this is what I told Kolding City Archives, that let's use the ways that they are around this. So the first thing I did was all the images, we put them on Flickr. And Flickr has been working with institutions around the world for years to try and get them to publish their images on there. The great thing about Flickr is that it facilitates that you can very clearly indicate what the copyright status of something is, both for things that are in public domain, but also things that are more modern things. So if you put your images on there, you can say, all copyright mine, and no one is allowed to use them. They're allowed to look at them on your profile. Or you can say, I'm going to put I'm going to put a CC0 on it all. Say, I'm giving, I'm letting everyone use my material for anything that they want. And that's what Kolding City did. They put it on there and left it all open. And the great thing about Flickr is that it has a very well described API. So without actually they thought about it, but they didn't actually have to do anything. They didn't have to build anything. But Kolding City now has an image base online with one of the best, I would say, APIs or most well-described APIs in the world at their fingertips. They had a lot of geographical points that I know I've talked a lot about images today, but geographical points is a big part of heritage data sets also, especially in archaeology, but also in history. So they have a lot of points that they wanted to present also. And here they use Google Maps, because again, Google Maps has an API and ways to export this data set so that others can reuse it. And last, they had some structured data on these people. Names, birth, where they lived and whatnot. And we put that into a Google spreadsheet because, again, Google has an API so that I can use this for various things. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do at the moment, trying to make a tutorial where using these accessible platforms and trying to show everyone how you can mash up this data, how you can reuse it for different creative or learning endeavors. And yes, that's what I'm trying to work with at the moment. So yes, I think that's what I wanted to say about it. Yes. And of course, it is, like Chris was talking about, it's all about experimenting with these data sets. And that's very much the ethos also of the hackathons and any kind of work with these heritage data, is experimenting, daring to sort of fail forward and try things out. And sometimes it goes wrong, usually it goes wrong. But we take a little step every time, and that's what makes it exciting. So, have I left time for any questions? 5 minutes, perhaps. Yes? Yeah?
Hello. Nikolaj from DBC.
Yeah.
When leaving your data on a commercial platform, what are your concerns about that?
When leaving it on a commercial platform, one would be that they are, of course, not required to preserve it there in the long run. So that would... I wouldn't use a commercial platform as the only... I wouldn't use that as my backup or as the only place. I would use it as a place to present the data for the public or for everyone else. But I would still make sure that I had a data structure for it down below. Yes, that would definitely.
Well, just to add to that, I remember hearing from Vint Cerf from Google saying that really, the only places capable of doing data, supporting our data needs in the future are Google, Amazon, Microsoft, because it's just an ongoing process of trying to keep, to store this data, and at some point, it's gonna be a problem for all of us to try and handle it. So,
I have examples recently that I'm still working with trying to resolve of a data set that is stored in a custom database with a custom interface on a server. That no one's actually sure where exactly the server is, and no one remembers who actually has the codes. Everyone assumed that that person had it, or that person had it, or that company had it. Now I think it's lost. So that I don't... the risk of that is less if it's on something like this. But of course it's always, backups and backups and more backups. Yeah.
I read this report and I was trying to tweet it out. I can't find it, but it was this amazing report on how all these cultural heritage institutions are trying to, or at least trying to put forth the rights for all these, this material, and their systems. It's because sometimes it's standardized, it's not accurate. Like one of the catalogers could be entering certain data, but then, the system itself could be expressing that all this data, in the system is open. But so it's like, seems like in that report, there were so many conflicts about rights. I'm so glad that you brought it up.
Conflicts about rights, yes. That is, yeah. It's such a big issue. I'm not quite sure what the answer is yet. I'm hoping it'll come to me one day. But I think one of the answers is to keep talking about it and keep bringing it up, and not letting people go around on their own being scared, because that is really, that's poisonous. And you get so scared that you're completely... we were scared too before we put things on up for the org below. We thought, like, what could happen? What would happen? And actually, what did happen was something quite interesting that we had not predicted. There was, I don't know how many of you might have heard of it. It was a story in the Danish big newspapers. It even came up at Rådhuspladsen on the big light board thing about the pictures of a dead girl on there. We had not seen that coming. But that was a story that people took and ran with, because that's what they thought was interesting. And the archivist was sitting there going, that's not what we wanted to talk about. but that's what happens when you put things out there. You can't control it. And that is a very scary thought. But it's a conversation that we need to have in the community also. So we need to have the skills to work with the data. But I think it's very important that while we get the skills, we also have the conversations about what can we do with the data, and also what shouldn't we do with this data. Where are the ethical limits? Because I do understand the worry that if we make, one of my colleagues in the US is making this 3D model of this African-American sanctuary of this AME church, and what if it's used in some shoot-them-up game that's very, it's difficult. It's a very difficult area. So, yes.
It's true. Are you oh. Come on.
Turn it.
I threw a rock at the world's biggest lake and I missed. Okay. Hi. Yeah, not so much a question, but a comment or experience. I used to work for the Norwegian Mapping Authority, and they were involved in a digital laser scanning at 1 meter interval of the entire country. So, and of course, Google Maps wanted, or Google Earth wanted that data, but they didn't want to pay for it. So that was a huge thing because we had spent hundreds of millions of kroner to get this done through contractors and through all of us working on it. We weren't about to just give it away. So that's another thing when you're working with these big companies, Google or Yahoo, or who I think owns Flickr, or Microsoft or whatever, that you have to be able to set your foot down too and say, okay, that's why if you go to Google Earth and try to see a picture of anywhere in Norway, it's horrible because they don't have the good data. You have to use the Norwegian portal. So it's not just about finding the right people to do it. You may have to do it yourself, and rather than rely on a commercial.
There's a lot of conflicts in this with commercial. One of the things I didn't mention, because it doesn't really apply to Denmark, but it does apply to nearly every other country, is ancestry. When it comes to like data set like census and parish records and other data sets that might be interesting for family researchers, Ancestry is like Google on that market. They are sitting on this and they are getting it digitized, and they really, I'm not a great fan of the model, but in Denmark, of course, we don't have any dealings with Ancestry because we've already put it all online for free. So there's no business model for Ancestry in Denmark. But there is in many other countries. And it's very difficult working with that. And you're right, you have to put your foot down. So what I'm talking about with Kolding is not a question really of working with them. It's just a question of using their platforms. But again, sometimes you're of course giving them value also. That's what they live off, that we put stuff on these platforms and give them value. Yeah, I don't know. But it's a conflict.
Well, it's sort of in a similar, like I was mentioning before, that libraries or museums, they work on this data, they put a lot of effort into opening it, and then they want to get some credit for that attribution. So I've seen cases where basically the library says that, that this open data that they've done some work on is, the copyright's with them now in some ways, and that's not entirely accurate, right? And so
that's one of the first principles of the Open Glam movement is don't put extra rights on top of things that are already, and another thing that sort of says digitizing a material doesn't give you the right to the material. There are other questions in that, to be a little bit provocative, and you could also say if it's a public institution that's doing this work, should they, can we perhaps maybe say that they have an ethical responsibility to also open this up and freely without putting their own watermark on the images? There's a lot of discussions, but I do think it's very important to have the discussion at the same time as we work with the data. Yes? Is my time up? Super. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.